So you missed the introduction, so you have no idea at all what I said about you. But please welcome Gary Abram.
Thank you for that kind introduction. And I apologize deeply for having to drive around for a half an hour looking for 101 West Church Street. But, you know, cell phones and friends with cell phones are great because that's what got me here. Okay. There's a remarkable amount of overlap between what I'm going to say and what my friend Larry just said. The Chemung County. First of all, let me preface my remarks by saying I'm an environmental attorney. I represent residents for the protection of Lowman and Chemung. I represented them in their attempt to challenge the disposal of drill cuttings at the Chemung County Landfill in 2010, and I'll talk about that in a minute. I'm also my practice is focused on landfills. I have represented several municipalities and citizens groups that have attempted to limit or stop the growth or siting of a landfill in their community. I've been special counsel to Niagara County for 8 years now, and that's relevant here because they've hired me to try to stop the expansion of the chemical waste landfill in Niagara County, run by CWM, Chemical Waste Management, a subsidiary of Waste Management, the only hazardous waste landfill in the state of New York. And that's going to come back in my remarks as well. But I have learned a lot about radiation and radium-226 in particular because that site in Niagara County is located on a former Manhattan Project site. And there is nuclear radiation all over the place there. And so the challenge has been to find a spot at that site where you can excavate without risking exposure to the public of radiation in the excavated soils. Let me turn to the Chemung County landfill now. And as most of you probably know, there's a public comment period until March 4th to comment on the landfill's proposal to expand in size. And the purpose of the expansion is apparently to accommodate greater volumes of Marcellus shale drill cuttings and other kinds of Marcellus shale wastes. And I'll talk about that. As you know from Larry's talk, Chemung County Landfill is operated under a lease by a subsidiary of Casella Waste Systems, which operates several other landfills in New York, at least 3 of which accept drill cuttings, spill contaminated soil, and certain sludges from Marcellus shale drilling sites in Pennsylvania. The drill cuttings are pulverized rock from the horizontal leg of a gas well bore prior to fracking. Drill cuttings are produced before fracking begins. Drill cuttings arrive at the landfill wet, raising issues about what is in the liquid that accompanies the cuttings. Specifically, drill cuttings are coated with either briny liquid that is part of the shale formation or drilling fluid which was injected into the well bore to help bring the cuttings to the surface, or both. Drill cuttings are the consistency of wet sand, usually. Before looking further at the concerns that have been raised about Marcellus shale industry wastewater, let's look just at the drill cuttings as if they were perfectly dry. Scott Fody, the materials management supervisor for DEC Region 8, which we're in, stated in a previous forum that Marcellus shale drill cuttings are no more radioactive than the granite countertop on one's kitchen. However, independent research does not bear this out. Actual measurements of Marcellus shale drill cuttings have shown the level of activity is about 20 times background, or 20 times more than what granite might emit. Now let's turn to the question of what is in the liquid that accompanies the drill cuttings. The liquid can be 15,000 times more radioactive than background. And that's where most of the problem lies. The briny liquid that surrounds and permeates the Marcellus Shale has been leaching relatively low levels of radium-226 from the rock for millions of years and is now saturated with radium. The shale rock contains naturally occurring radiation in the uranium-238 chain, which includes radium, but the other radionuclides in the chain are not as water-soluble as radium. As a result, the liquid has become up to 15,000 times more concentrated with radium-226 than the surface environment, and 750 times more concentrated than the shale rock itself. The brine has thus concentrated the radium. The same thing happens to drilling fluids when they are reused and recirculated in new well bores in the Marcellus Shale. Hydrofracking can involve a dozen different wells from a single well pad. As drilling fluids are reused, like the extant brine, these fluids can become saturated with radium-226. So let me go back over the last point. Drill cuttings from the vertical portion of the well are not any more radioactive than background. And the brine or other liquid that comes to the surface with these cuttings is also no more radioactive than background. Drill cuttings from the vertical part of the well could be disposed of in any rock quarry and are harmless. These are not Marcellus Shale drill cuttings. Drill cuttings are taken to a landfill because they are not harmless. What's going into the Chemung County landfill are Marcellus Shale drill cuttings. In 2011, it was reported that Steuben County's Commissioner of Public Works, Vince Spagnoletti, said, quote, "If they drill in New York State, in Steuben County, there's going to be hundreds of thousands of tons of this material. None of us want it spread over the countryside. If the material is not safe, why not?" Radium-226 is a persistent bioaccumulative carcinogen. Let's unpack that phrase. It's a carcinogen because it is known to cause bone cancer and leukemia. That's because once ingested, radium-226 concentrates in the bones where our blood is made. It's bioaccumulative because the concentration of radium-226 in the environment progressively increases as it moves up the food chain. Radium-226 released into water will be ingested by microorganisms. These microorganisms will be eaten by other microorganisms. The concentration of radium will be greater in larger organisms, and concentrations increase roughly geometrically as the radium moves up the food chain. The fish people catch and eat from the Chemung River or the Genesee River downstream where Casella's leachate goes after treatment will have the highest concentrations. Casella sends roughly 5 to 20 million gallons of leachate per year to the Chemung County Sewer District's water treatment plants in Elmira. Neither the Elmira water treatment plants nor the Village of Bath or Village of Wellsville water treatment plants where Casella takes its landfill leachate takes any radioactivity out of the leachate before discharging the treated wastewater to these rivers. Finally, radium-226 is persistent because its half-life is 1,620 years. Thus, in 3,240 years, half of the radium discharged into rivers will still be in the environment. It's important to stress that none of the radium would naturally be in the environment without fracking. It would remain deep underground for many millions of years. Radium-226 binds to sediments in streams and rivers and will build up there over time even after the river washes much of it downstream. Thus, radium-226 is dangerous because it is a persistent bioaccumulative carcinogen. No one has estimated the volume of waste liquid being dumped into the Chemung County landfill along with Marcellus Shale drill cuttings. In addition to the liquid accompanying drill cuttings, the landfill accepts spill-contaminated soil, filtration solids, waste sand, and sludges from the treatment of Marcellus Shale wastewater. These wastes can be even more wet than the drill cuttings. Pennsylvania recently imposed more stringent rules on the management of gas and oil drilling wastewater, requiring that it be treated and reused as much as possible. In fact, Casella has taken advantage of this change in policy by installing liquid solidification facilities at the Chemung County landfill in Pennsylvania and the Hyland Landfill in Angelica, New York. The processing of wastewater results in substantial volumes of wet waste solids taken out of the water that are landfilled in the Chemung County landfill, the Hyland Landfill in Angelica, and the Hakes Landfill in Painted Post, all operated by Casella. Such wastes are considered solid waste so long as they contain a minimum of 20% solids. They should not have any free-flowing liquids, but a relatively uniformly consistent sludge can approach 80% liquid. Wet waste can be made uniform, and free liquids can be reduced by mixing the waste with sawdust or oak bark chips. And the image of the pile of drill cuttings you saw in Larry's slideshow showed the pile next to a pile of sawdust or wood chips. One observer described a load of sludge from a Marcellus Shale drilling site being dumped at a landfill looked like chocolate pudding as it fell out of the truck. So it's clear that substantial volumes of Marcellus Shale wastewater are being dumped in the Chemung County landfill, mixed with other liquids in the landfill, and collected from the bottom of the landfill as leachate. Landfills have plastic bottom liners above and below a layer several feet thick of gravel, into which piping is installed to allow the leachate to escape. Landfills are allowed to leak 20 gallons of leachate per acre per day from the gravel layer. The currently active area where drilling wastes are disposed at Chemung is 29 acres, so the allowable leakage rate for that area is 580 gallons per day, or about 1/4 gallons per year. The proposed expansion would add about 45 more acres to that. As I said earlier, radium-226 is soluble in water, but no one has estimated the amount of radium-226 that can be expected to be leached out of the landfill over time. The Chemung County landfill has been dumping roughly tens of thousands of tons of drill cuttings and other solid waste from the Marcellus Shale industry each year for the last 3.5 years. About 6 months after starting to dump these materials in 2009, Casella obtained permission to do so by email from the DEC, without any testing or analysis of the material for radioactivity. Nobody had done any testing for radioactivity at that time, not Casella, not the DEC. In 2010, after Residents for the Protection of Lowman and Chemung learned about the email, the group challenged the practice, and Casella subsequently submitted a model of what would happen if the landfill leaked into the groundwater. That's the model Larry just talked about. However, that model assumes that drill cuttings alone are being dumped and no wastewater accompanies the drill cuttings. The model also assumes a maximum radium-226 concentration in the waste is 50 picocuries per gram, as you just heard. However, in 2012, a load of drill cuttings from Pennsylvania was measured at the Allegany Waste Systems landfill in Erie County, which also takes this stuff, and found to be as high as 205 picocuries per gram. These measurements were taken at 8 transects across the open top of the waste load from the top down into the load. At the Chemung County landfill, no measurements of the waste load in the truck are taken. Instead, a radiation alarm is installed at the gate. The radiation alarm at the landfill has not been triggered once because of drill cuttings, despite the fact that radiation alarms were triggered at Pennsylvania landfills by loads of Marcellus Shale drill cuttings over 1,000 times between 2009 and 2012. Why no alarms at Chemung? We think that there are several reasons. First, the radiation alarms measure gamma radiation, but only 3% of the radiation emitted by radium-226 is gamma radiation. The rest is alpha rays, and these don't pass through the skin, let alone the walls of a truck. Second, the radiation detector is located at the waste scale at the landfill gate on either side of an incoming truck. Radioactive waste can be buried in the middle of a waste load and avoid detection. Third, the radiation alarm level at the Chemung County landfill has been set by DEC at 5 times the local background radiation level, and the maximum radiation concentration allowed in waste is 50 picocuries per gram, about 50 times background. By contrast, at the Niagara County Hazardous Waste Landfill, the radiation investigation level for waste has been set at 1.5 times local background. And the maximum concentration allowed in waste into the landfill is designated in the landfill's permit as, quote, slightly above background. Under those permit conditions, waste loads measuring what is currently permitted at Chemung County have been turned away. Finally, we believe the radiation alarms are not always operated properly. For example, a truck will be allowed to coast through the waste scale without coming to a full stop and avoid detection. One other concern that is inadequately understood is the generation of radon, a radioactive gas, and the second leading cause of lung cancer in the U.S. after cigarette smoking. Radon results from the decay of radium-226. Will the landfill emit radon gas into the air as radium decays? If so, how much? And will residential property in the area around the landfill be exposed at harmful levels? Radium has a very fast half-life, 8 days. So the concern about exposures is focused on landfill workers and residents who live close to the landfill. Landfills generate hundreds of thousands of tons of gas each year, most of which is carbon dioxide and methane. Less than 1% of the gas is highly toxic, and that has resulted in regulations requiring landfills to capture the gas with gas wells installed into the landfill and interconnected with horizontal pipes and blowers and directed to a combustion device that will burn off the toxics. However, much like radiation in wastewater, radon will pass through the gas collection and control system and go right into the ambient air. That effect and the potential impact of this pathway for radiation exposure has not been considered by the county. In short, independent research shows that relatively high-activity radioactive materials are generated at Marcellus Shale drilling sites, and the concentration of radium-226 in landfill leachate can be expected to increase more and more over time. And Larry talked about the radiation testing of leachate that they're doing, and I just today, as a matter of fact, got a hold of the test results, and in fact, the last test in June 2013 showed that a maximum of 14.15 picocuries per liter is in the leachate from directly from the landfill. That's not the concentration in the leachate lagoon, because they take the leachate out of the landfill and they put it in a holding pond or lagoon, and there it's diluted with stormwater before it goes to Elmira and directly into the river, because as I said, no radiation will be taken out of it by the waste treatment plant or the wastewater treatment plant in Elmira. Nor is radon removed from gas generated by the landfill and emitted into the local air, but no one has done any study of the pathways of exposure to radiation from these things. Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection has begun a series of studies of the pathways to radiation exposure from trucking, landfilling, and treating and discharging landfill leachate, but the results are not expected until later this summer. Without adequate information about radiation exposure, the assertion in the county's draft environmental impact statement that radiation detectors, quote, will mitigate any potential significant adverse environmental impacts to the maximum extent practicable is not credible. The county should, therefore, at a minimum, withdraw its proposal to expand the landfill until this information becomes available. Thank you.